Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Our journey tonight begins in London, among winding ivy paths and weathered gravestones. Highgate Cemetery, one of the most famous resting places in England, stands not just as a burial ground, but as a stage for stories of mystery and shadow. By day, it is striking with its Gothic arches and statues of angels cloaked in moss. By night, its silence deepens into something else, something unsettling, as though the ground itself is alive with memory. Highgate was opened in the 19th century during the height of the Victorian era. At that time, London was a bustling city full of life and progress. Yet death was also very present in people's minds. Disease, poverty, and overcrowding meant that graveyards were quickly filling, and so new cemeteries were built to carry the weight of the departed. Highgate was not simply a practical answer. It was designed to be beautiful, to echo the great resting places of Europe, with sweeping avenues of tombs and gardens that seemed more like a park than a graveyard. It became a place where the wealthy could be buried in grandeur, surrounded by marble and stone that whispered of eternal peace. Yet peace is not always what one feels when walking there. Visitors often speak of a heavy air, a sensation of being watched from the edges of vision. The cemetery has long been linked with tales of hauntings, perhaps because of the sheer number of souls interred there, or perhaps because certain spirits refuse to remain silent. Some say the very layout of Highgate, with its overgrown pathways and crumbling mausoleums, feels like a maze designed to hold the lost, both living and dead. One of the most persistent legends is that of the Highgate vampire. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, reports spread of a dark figure haunting the cemetery grounds. Witnesses described a tall presence with glowing red eyes that glared from the shadows. Some claimed it moved silently between the gravestones, while others swore they felt its icy breath on the back of their necks. The story became so widespread that vampire hunters, self-proclaimed experts, and curious crowds gathered at the cemetery gates, hoping to catch a glimpse. Even now, people still speak of those nights when fear and fascination turned Highgate into a theater of the macabre. But the vampire is not the only ghostly tale tied to this place. Many who wander through its avenues tell of spectral forms drifting near the tombs. One story recalls a man who was walking through Swain's Lane, the road that passes alongside the cemetery. He noticed a dark shape gliding silently towards him, taller than any living person. It passed through the iron gates as though they were nothing more than mist. The man froze, his body rigid with cold, until the shadow vanished into the stones. He swore afterwards that he had seen something not of this world. Others speak of a woman in white, her pale figure moving through the ivy-draped graves. She is said to weep softly, her cries echoing faintly in the stillness. Some believe she searches for a lost child, others that she mourns her own fate. No one knows who she was in life, but her presence lingers in the hearts of those who hear her. Highgate's ghosts are not only heard or seen. Many visitors describe sensations that feel impossible to explain. A sudden plunge in temperature, even on warm nights. The unmistakable feeling of someone standing close by, though the path is empty. A whisper brushing past the ear, only to fade into silence when one turns to listen. These small moments may seem fleeting, yet they leave behind a deep impression, a memory that clings long after leaving the gates. The architecture itself seems to play a role in the haunting. The Egyptian avenue, with its solemn stone passage guarded by towering columns, feels like a portal into another world. Some say stepping into it is like moving between realms where the living and the dead exist side by side. The Circle of Lebanon, a ring of grand vaults encircling a giant cedar tree, holds its own secrets. In its shadowed doorways, people claim to glimpse faces peering from the dark, faces that disappear as quickly as they appear. There are even tales of animals that do not belong to the living world. A phantom cat is said to roam the grounds, slinking silently across tombs, its eyes gleaming unnaturally bright. A spectral dog has been reported too, barking into the night before vanishing into nothing. Such stories may sound strange, yet they fit the atmosphere of Highgate, where everything feels touched by mystery. Some researchers believe the haunting of Highgate is intensified by the energy of the many people buried there. Among them are famous names, poets, scientists, and revolutionaries. Their stories alone carry weight, and some wonder if their restless energy adds to the strange activity. To walk among their tombs is to walk through history and perhaps to brush against something still alive within it. Highgate does not reveal its secrets all at once. The more one looks, the more layers appear, hidden in the ivy and behind the ornate stonework. Some visitors say that the spirits here are not malicious, but melancholic, shadows of lives once vibrant, now reduced to whispers. Yet others describe encounters that left them shaken, as though they had crossed into the path of something darker, something that fed on fear. In the 1970s, when the stories of the so-called vampire grew louder, reports began piling up of people collapsing near the gates, drained of energy and unable to explain what had overcome them. There were also rumors of animals being found lifeless, their bodies strangely bloodless, fueling the idea that some supernatural predator was at work. Whether the tales were a creation of rumor, hysteria, or something real, they cemented Highgate's reputation as a place where the veil between life and death grows thin. Local residents around the cemetery also reported strange happenings. Some claimed to see figures wandering the perimeter, staring silently before dissolving into thin air. Others heard knocking against the tomb walls as though something inside wanted to be released. A few even described waking in the night to find pale faces staring at them from outside their windows, only to vanish the moment they blinked. These accounts stretched beyond the gates, as if the cemetery's shadows could spill into the living world. The legends and sightings grew so intense that Highgate became a destination for thrill seekers. Young people would dare each other to spend the night there, entering the grounds illegally after dark. Many left boasting of their bravery, but there were also those who left in silence, refusing to speak of what they had seen or heard. One story tells of a group who camped near the Circle of Lebanon, only to wake in the dead of night surrounded by whispering voices. The voices seemed to come from every direction at once, circling them like unseen figures. By dawn, the group fled, pale and trembling, never to return. Even in more recent years, Highgate has maintained this unsettling reputation. Paranormal investigators who explore its paths often record unexplainable phenomena. Cold spots that move like invisible presences, strange orbs of light caught on camera, and electronic devices malfunctioning without cause. Some recordings capture faint voices, whispers too soft to be made by the living group presence. They are often interpreted as messages from the dead, fragments of conversations trapped in stone and air. Beyond the supernatural, Highgate's atmosphere itself plays a role in shaping these experiences. The cemetery is divided into the east and west sections, each with its own character. The east, where Karl Marx rests, is more open and accessible, lined with simpler graves alongside the grand. The west, however, is older and more enclosed, its paths winding through dense growth, its tombs more ornate and crumbling with age. The West is where the most haunting stories emerge, where the architecture itself feels alive with presence. Standing in front of its vaults, one cannot help but sense that the silence hides something unseen. One of the most chilling features of Highgate is its underground catacombs. Hidden beneath the grand mausoleums are chambers where coffins rest in shadow. Few have walked those halls without describing an almost overwhelming feeling of dread. The air is stale, thick with the weight of centuries, and the narrow passages seem to close in like a grip. Visitors describe hearing faint scratching, as if wood shifts against stone, or sighs that echo from deeper within the dark. These sounds are often explained as natural, the creaks and groans of old structures, yet those who experience them insist there is something more. Legends even suggest that the very ground of Highgate is charged with energy. Some believe that ancient ley lines, invisible pathways of power, intersect beneath the cemetery. If true, this could explain why the site attracts so much paranormal activity, why so many spirits seem unable to leave. To the sensitive, it is as though the land itself hums with hidden force, a current flowing beneath every stone. The Highgate vampire, the woman in white, the whispering shadows, and the restless dead all weave together into a tapestry of stories that continue to draw visitors. Some come seeking proof of the supernatural. Others come simply to admire the haunting beauty of the place. Yet many leave with something more, an impression, carved not into their minds, but into their very bones, as if Highgate has imprinted itself upon them. What remains most haunting is not just the specific sightings or legends, but the feeling that lingers long after stepping through its gates. A sensation that you were not alone, that unseen eyes followed you, and that the silence itself had tried to tell you something. Highgate is more than a cemetery. It is a story told in stone and shadow, a story that continues to unfold each night. To truly understand the atmosphere of Highgate, imagine walking there at dusk. The sun dips below the horizon, and the last streaks of light filter through tall trees that arch overhead like cathedral ceiling. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and ivy, and every step echoes faintly on gravel paths. Statues of angels watch silently, their faces worn smooth by time, their wings draped in moss. Some stand tall and proud, others tilt at odd angles, as though bowing under the weight of centuries. It is beautiful, but in that beauty lies something unsettling, a reminder that all things fade, yet some linger. Visitors often say that Highgate carries two presences at once. In daylight, it feels like history preserved, a monument to the Victorian fascination with death and remembrance. But at night, it changes. The shadows seem to stretch longer than they should, and the silence becomes oppressive, broken only by the rustle of leaves that sound like hushed voices. You might find yourself quickening your pace, glancing behind you, though the path is empty. This duality, beauty and unease, reverence and dread, makes Highgate unlike any other cemetery. Some who have walked its paths at night describe a sudden awareness of being drawn to certain graves. They speak of a pull, an invisible thread guiding them to specific spots, often graves of those who lived unusual lives. A young woman once told of being unable to leave the Egyptian Avenue. She circled it again and again, compelled to walk through the archway as though something inside beckoned her. Only after hours of wandering did she finally find her way out, trembling and exhausted. She never explained what she thought had kept her there, but her story adds to the sense that the cemetery itself exerts a kind of will. There are stories, too, of figures appearing just out of reach. One visitor recalled seeing a man dressed in Victorian clothing, leaning casually against a monument. Thinking it was an actor, or perhaps part of a tour, they raised a hand to wave. In that moment, the figure dissolved into mist, leaving only the outline of his shape fading into the stone. Another account speaks of a woman who noticed a figure crouched in the shadows of a crypt. As she approached, the figure rose and stretched unnaturally tall, taller than any living man. She turned and fled before it could step closer, certain she had encountered something beyond the living. For all these stories, one of the most chilling aspects of Highgate is the soundscape. Silence here is never truly silent. Many have described faint footsteps behind them, soft and measured, yet when they turn, the path is empty. Others hear sighs carried on the wind, or the unmistakable sound of whispers in languages long forgotten. Some even report laughter, high-pitched and echoing, as though children play in the distance, though no children are there. These sounds leave visitors questioning whether they are hearing echoes of the past, or if something unseen is deliberately reaching out. The cemetery also holds an unsettling reputation for sudden disorientation. People often speak of losing their way, even when they know the grounds well. Paths seem to twist upon themselves, and landmarks that should guide the way appear unfamiliar. It is not uncommon for a simple walk to stretch into hours with visitors emerging confused, as though they had stepped out of a dream. This disorientation has led some to suggest that Highgate bends perception, distorting the sense of time and place, pulling wanderers into its own rhythm. One of the strangest tales is of a man who claimed to have fallen asleep inside the cemetery. He had gone there seeking solitude, intending to sketch the Gothic architecture. He sat near the circle of Lebanon where warm sunlight filtered down between trees. At some point, he drifted into sleep. When he awoke, it was dark, and he was surrounded by dozens of faintly glowing figures. They stood in silence, facing him from every direction. Too terrified to move, he closed his eyes, whispering a prayer. When he opened them again, the figures had vanished, and the first light of dawn was breaking. He left at once and never returned. Beyond personal encounters, Highgate's legends have entered London's folklore. For decades, it has been a magnet for occult enthusiasts, storytellers, and researchers seeking proof of the supernatural. Rituals were rumored to have been performed among its tombs in the 1970s, with groups attempting to summon or banish spirits. Broken candles, strange symbols, and the remains of rituals were discovered in hidden corners. Whether these rituals stirred the hauntings or were born from them, no one can say for certain, but they added to the aura of menace that clings to the cemetery. And yet, Highgate does not feel entirely hostile. For many, it inspires awe as much as fear. Some find it peaceful, describing the spirits not as threats, but as guardians, keeping the watch over the grounds. They feel a sense of being accompanied rather than hunted, as though the dead acknowledge their presence but mean no harm. This mix of terror and reverence makes the cemetery endlessly fascinating, a place where people seek both fright and comfort, sometimes within the same visit. Perhaps what makes Highgate most compelling is the idea that every visitor contributes to its story. Each gasp at a shadow, each hurried step down a silent path, becomes part of the tapestry. The cemetery remembers, and those who walk its grounds leave with memories of their own. Memories that are hard to explain, harder still to forget. As night deepens over Highgate, the cemetery becomes a world apart. The city sounds of London fade into the distance, muffled as though swallowed by the earth. What remains is the stillness of stone, the watchful presence of statues, and the subtle stirrings of what cannot be explained. Those who linger after dusk often speak of a feeling that grows heavier with every passing minute, as if the veil between worlds thins with the dark. Caretakers who have worked in Highgate for decades sometimes share their own uneasy experiences. One man, tasked with routine maintenance, described locking up for the evening when he heard the crunch of footsteps behind him. Expecting a late visitor, he turned to speak, but no one was there. The sound continued, pacing him step for step until he reached the gate. Only once outside did the phantom steps cease. He finished his story by saying he never again stayed alone after nightfall. Another caretaker recounted entering the catacombs to check the structural supports. Armed with only a lantern, he descended the stone steps into the stale air. As he reached the lower passage, he heard what sounded like dozens of voices murmuring together, too faint to make out, yet unmistakably human. He froze, straining to listen. But the moment he raised the lantern higher, the voices fell silent. He left without completing his inspection, convinced that he had disturbed something that wanted to remain undisturbed. Stories like these are plentiful, and they give Highgate a life of its own. Even those who are skeptical admit that the cemetery carries an aura difficult to dismiss. Skeptics may argue that the haunting tales are born from overactive imaginations, the eerie atmosphere of Gothic architecture, or the human mind's tendency to find patterns in silence and shadow. But for those who have felt the icy brush of unseen fingers or heard the whispers of the departed, such explanations are not enough. The cemetery's legends also live on through its visitors. Tourists who come for history often leave speaking of strange feelings or odd encounters. Some say their cameras capture streaks of light or faint faces in the background of photographs. Others claim that recordings taken among the graves reveal faint voices upon playback, phrases that were never spoken by anyone present. One traveler described filming the Circle of Lebanon, only to find later the shape of a figure standing among the tombs. When she returned to the spot in daylight, no statue matched what the camera had captured. Beyond ghosts and legends, Highgate is also a reflection of the Victorian relationship with death. In that era, mourning was not hidden, but displayed, woven into culture through elaborate funerals, mourning clothes, and ornate gravestones. Death was seen as both an end and a transition, a gateway into another existence. Perhaps this cultural weight adds to the cemetery's atmosphere. It is not only a place of the dead, but a monument to how deeply people once contemplated what lies beyond. One cannot ignore the symbolism scattered through its architecture. Angels stand with faces bowed in sorrow or raise their hands toward heaven. Egyptian motifs speak of eternity and hidden knowledge. Ivy crawls over stone as if to remind visitors that nature reclaims all. Every detail contributes to the sensation that Highgate is more than a graveyard. It is a dialogue between life, death, and what may come after. To walk its paths is to sense that you are part of that dialogue, however briefly. Whether or not the ghosts are real, the feelings they inspire are undeniable. Each story told, each shiver felt, is part of the legacy of Highgate. Its shadows are not silent. They murmur, they beckon, and they watch. For some, this is terrifying. For others, it is strangely comforting, a reminder that death is not emptiness, but continuation, a presence that never fully leaves. There are those who insist that Highgate holds something older than the graves themselves. They whisper of the land being sacred long before the cemetery was built, a place where ancient rituals once marked the passage between worlds. If true, then the Victorian builders merely added to what was already a threshold between realms. Perhaps this is why spirits linger, why the ground feels charged, why so many encounters occur here. Highgate may not just be haunted, it may be a crossroads. As we leave this segment, imagine standing beneath the cedar tree in the Circle of Lebanon. The night air is cool, and the shadows of vaults rise around you like silent guardians. The tree towers above, its roots deep in centuries of soil, its branches reaching into the sky. You feel the hush of the cemetery pressing close, as if countless eyes are fixed upon you from the dark. Some belong to stone angels, others, perhaps, belong to those who never left. Highgate Cemetery remains one of London's most compelling mysteries. It is a place of beauty and sorrow, of history and haunting, where the living and the dead seem to coexist. Every path holds a story, every shadow holds a question, and every whisper lingers long after it fades. Whether the spirits are truly there, or whether they are born from our own fears and hopes, the effect is the same. Highgate captures the imagination, leaving all who enter with the sense that something unseen walks beside them. And as we step away from its ivy-covered gates tonight, we carry its whispers with us, drifting softly into the next tale of restless spirits and the places they haunt. Highgate Cemetery holds many stories, but perhaps the most compelling are not written on its headstones or etched into marble. They live in the memories of those who claim to have walked its paths and felt the unseen brush of something that should not be there. These are the personal encounters told in hushed tones by people who insist they saw more than stone and ivy. Some of the most common reports describe the feeling of being followed. Visitors speak of walking alone and hearing soft footsteps echoing behind them, keeping pace no matter how quickly or slowly they move. When they turn, there is nothing but the winding path. Yet the sensation persists, as though something lingers just beyond sight. One woman described it as a presence pressing so close that she felt the hair rise on her neck, her body warning her of danger, even as her eyes found nothing. She left the cemetery in silence, shaken but certain that she had not been alone. Others recall sudden waves of cold sweeping through the air, not the natural chill of evening, but sharp plunges in temperature that arrive like an icy hand and vanish just as quickly. People often describe it as if they had stepped into a pocket of winter, a moment where the warmth of life is drained away. These chills are sometimes accompanied by a faint whisper, too soft to make out, but enough to suggest a voice carried on the wind. Whether the whispers are words or only the imagination, no one can say, but they leave behind a memory impossible to dismiss. One story often told is that of a man walking near Swain's Lane late at night. He noticed movement near the cemetery gates and paused, watching as a tall figure appeared between the iron bars. The figure was darker than the shadows around it, its outline too sharp to be mistaken for a trick of light. He described it as having glowing eyes that fixed on him from across the road. The moment stretched into silence until the figure glided backwards, disappearing into the cemetery without sound. The man stood rooted in fear, his breath shallow, before finally running home. Years later, he said he could still recall those eyes as if they had burned into him. But not all encounters are terrifying. Some seem filled with sorrow rather than menace. The tale of the woman in white is one such story. Many have spoken of her pale figure drifting among the graves, her gown trailing across the ivy. She is often heard weeping softly, her cries so delicate they almost blend with the rustling of leaves. Those who have seen her describe a feeling of overwhelming sadness, as though they had intruded upon her eternal grief. No one knows her name, nor why she wanders. Some suggest she is a mother searching for a lost child, others that she mourns her own untimely death. Whoever she is, her presence lingers in the hearts of those who witness her, leaving behind a memory more mournful than frightening. Another recurring encounter is with a phantom cyclist. On certain nights, people passing the outer walls of Highgate have reported hearing the ringing of a bicycle bell, followed by the faint sound of wheels on gravel. Looking up, they see the shape of a man riding slowly along the cemetery paths, his head bowed. The figure never looks up, never acknowledges the living. He simply rides into the distance before fading away. Some speculate he was once a messenger or a worker connected to the cemetery, doomed to repeat his route forever. Others see him as a symbol of life halted in motion, a journey that never truly ended. Perhaps the most unsettling reports are those of unseen hands. A number of visitors describe feeling a sudden tug on their clothing, as if someone were pulling them back. Some say they felt a hand grip their wrist or shoulder, cold and firm, though no one was there. These encounters often occur near the catacombs, where the air is thick and heavy. One woman claimed that as she descended the steps, an invisible force pushed her forward, causing her to stumble. She left quickly, convinced that something had tried to keep her from going deeper. Photographs taken in Highgate also tell their own stories. Blurred figures appear where no one was standing. Faint faces peer from the windows of crypts, and streaks of light arc across the frame like movements captured mid-motion. Skeptics call them tricks of light, dust, or camera error. Yet those who were there often insist they felt a presence at the moment the photo was taken, a shiver down the spine that seemed to confirm that something was with them. These encounters accumulate like layers of mist, each one adding to the reputation of Highgate as a place where the past has not fully left. The stories differ in detail, but they share a common thread. The sense that the cemetery is alive with memory, that the walls and pathways hold echoes of every soul laid to rest within. To walk there is not simply to wander among the dead, but to brush against the edges of another reality, one that presses closer with every step. Some visitors say the first chill of Highgate comes not from its stories, but from its silence. Imagine wandering the winding paths alone, the iron gates creaking behind you, the hush of the trees swallowing every step. You glance at the carved angels leaning above the graves, their stone wings weathered, their eyes darkened by moss and time. Then a sound soft, quick, like footsteps pacing just out of sight. Many have sworn they've heard this while walking the circle of Lebanon, the grand ring of tombs cut into the earth, where crypts curve like a hidden amphitheater of the dead. Some say the footsteps belong to mourners who never left, still circling the resting places of those they loved, their grief looping endlessly under the shadow of the cedars. Among the most famous accounts is that of a tall, spectral figure haunting the cemetery at night. Witnesses describe him as impossibly gaunt, with a long coat trailing behind and eyes that shine red when caught by moonlight. This figure was said to vanish as quickly as he appeared, slipping behind crypts or melting into ivy-covered walls. In the 1970s, reports of this so-called vampire gripped the city, drawing crowds of curious thrill-seekers and self-proclaimed hunters into Highgate after dark. Though skeptics called it hysteria, the sheer number of sightings left many uneasy. Was it just imagination, sparked by Gothic architecture and dark legends, or had something truly sinister found a home among the tombs? One man reported walking past the cemetery gates when he suddenly froze. A piercing cold wrapped around him, and from the corner of his eye he caught a figure standing between the shadows. The man described the being as tall, with a dark silhouette and a face too pale to belong to the living. When he turned fully to confront it, the figure dissolved into the night air, leaving him shaken and breathless. Others have spoken of pressure on their chests while near certain tombs, as if unseen hands were pushing them back, warning them not to enter. These stories, whether folklore or lived terror, all carry a thread of the same atmosphere, the feeling that Highgate is never truly empty. There are gentler tales, too, whispers of spirits who seem less menacing and more mournful. A woman in white is often seen drifting near the paths, believed to be the ghost of a lady buried without closure, her death surrounded by sorrow. Some visitors describe hearing quiet sobbing near her grave, though when they search, They find only silence and ivy climbing the stones. In another corner of Highgate, a spectral nun is said to glide past the tombs, her hands clasped in prayer. Some believe she guards the resting souls, her vigil a protection rather than a threat. Her presence is said to bring calm rather than fear, a soft reminder that not all spirits linger in anger. Animals, too, have been drawn into the ghostly stories of Highgate. Several accounts mention the appearance of a phantom fox, darting between graves before vanishing into thin air. Others claim to have seen ravens that never take flight, sitting perfectly still on branches until they fade into mist. These animal apparitions, strange as they sound, only deepen the sense that the cemetery is layered with mystery, a place where the boundary between natural and supernatural bends. The strongest stories, however, come from those who dared to spend more than a fleeting moment within its grounds. One account tells of two friends who climbed into Highgate at night in search of thrills. As they wandered deeper, they felt watched, though the cemetery seemed deserted. They came upon the Egyptian Avenue with its massive archway guarded by stone pillars carved like lotus flowers. Stepping through, both men claimed to hear whispering voices echoing through the tunnel-like passage. At first, the whispers were faint, but then they grew louder, overlapping as if dozens of unseen people were speaking at once. Panic seized them, and they fled the cemetery, never daring to return. Highgate's haunted reputation is not built solely on scattered sightings, but on the persistent sense that time itself moves differently within its walls. Visitors often say that while wandering its avenues, minutes stretch into hours and hours vanish without explanation. One woman described entering the circle of Lebanon at dusk, only to emerge feeling as though she had been inside for half a day, though her watch claimed it had been less than 20 minutes. She spoke of a strange heaviness in the air, as if invisible layers of history were pressing down on her. Skeptics call it disorientation, caused by winding paths and dense foliage, but believers insist that the spirits of the cemetery distort the flow of time, pulling the living into their endless vigil. Among the most chilling reports is the phantom that appears near Swain's Lane, the road that borders Highgate's eastern side. Motorists have claimed to see a figure step into the road, tall and cloaked, with piercing red eyes. One driver swerved to avoid hitting the figure, only to realize there was no one there. His car skidded to a stop against the iron fence, and he stepped out trembling, convinced he had nearly killed a man. He found nothing but silence, and yet his hands shook so violently that he could barely drive away. Tales like these turned Swain's Lane into a focal point for ghost hunters, and even today, passers-by walk a little quicker when the night grows deep and the fog rolls low. It is not only shadowy figures that stir unease. There are whispers of unexplainable sounds that echo long after the cemetery gates are closed. Guards tasked with watching over Highgate have spoken of footsteps crunching along gravel, of distant cries carried through the trees, and of heavy breathing that follows them until they turn to find no one there. One guard told of locking the gates for the night when he heard the sound of a woman's voice singing. It was faint but clear, like a hymn carried on the wind. He followed it to the Egyptian Avenue, only to find the passage empty. The singing ceased abruptly, and the guard admitted that he fled rather than finish his rounds. His story has become a quiet reminder that even those familiar with Highgate are not immune to its eerie mysteries. And then there are the grave disturbances that refuse to be explained away. In the height of the 1970s hysteria, countless graves were found desecrated, not with theft in mind, but with something darker at play. Coffins were broken open, bodies disturbed, and symbols carved into the stone. Some blamed occult groups who were drawn to Highgate's Gothic grandeur, while others whispered of restless spirits forcing their way out of the ground. The image of half-opened tombs, their iron doors twisted, or their locks shattered, remains one of the most unsettling pieces of the cemetery's lore. The line between human cruelty and supernatural unrest blurred, and the cemetery became a stage where fear and fascination collided. Not all encounters end with terror, however. Some visitors describe moments of serenity where the supernatural feels less like a threat and more like a quiet companionship. A woman once told of visiting her grandmother's grave and feeling a sudden warmth on her shoulder, though she stood alone. She said it was like a hand resting there, steady and gentle, reassuring her that she was not forgotten. Another mourner claimed to have seen the faint outline of a child running between graves, laughter trailing behind like a memory replaying itself. These encounters do not frighten, but instead soothe, suggesting that Highgate is home to both restless shadows and tender spirits who remain near those they loved. Still, the stories of dread far outweigh the tales of peace. The towering vaults, the overgrown ivy, the silent pathways they seem designed to cradle ghostly presences. One man told of pausing in front of a tomb carved with a stone angel, only to watch in horror as its face seemed to shift. The hollowed eyes softened, lips curving into something almost like a smile, before the stone stilled again. He left quickly, unable to shake the image. Whether this was imagination or something unexplainable, he never returned to Highgate. Others have reported seeing shadows moving across walls with no source of light, shapes stretching and twisting like they were alive. Perhaps the most haunting detail is how many of these stories overlap. Different people, visiting decades apart, describe the same cloaked figure, the same whispering voices, the same chilling presence near Swain's Lane. These repetitions create a pattern too strong to dismiss easily, weaving Highgate into one of the most famously haunted places in the world. Whether spirits linger out of sorrow, vengeance, or simply habit, the truth is that few leave the cemetery without feeling that something unseen is watching from behind the ivy and stone. As the decades passed, the stories surrounding Highgate began to weave together into something larger than any single encounter. The cemetery transformed into a tapestry of restless spirits, where each tale added another thread to the pattern of fear, sorrow, and awe. Local newspapers once published letters from terrified residents who claimed that strange figures followed them after they had walked past the gates at night. One woman wrote that she heard footsteps matching her own as she hurried down Swain's Lane. Each time she stopped, so too did the sound. When she finally gathered the courage to turn, she saw only mist curling under the street lamp. Yet she swore she felt a pair of unseen eyes fixed on her back until she reached the safety of her home. Another curious case came from a group of teenagers in the late 20th century who dared one another to climb into the cemetery at midnight. They carried flashlights, their beams slicing through the overgrown ivy and cracked statues. They laughed at first, teasing one another about vampires and ghosts, until they stumbled upon an open vault. The stone door had been pushed aside, and inside the chamber, they thought they saw movement. When their lights swept across the space, they found nothing but dust and silence. But the air grew suffocating, and each of them felt as though something unseen had followed them home that night. For weeks afterward, they spoke of waking in the dark to find a figure standing at the foot of their beds, watching silently. Whether it was guilt, imagination, or something carried from Highgate itself, they never dared return. Stories like these fuel the notion that Highgate is not simply a place of death, but a vessel brimming with energy, a liminal space where the living world and the afterlife press against one another. Paranormal investigators who have studied the grounds claim that its architecture contributes to the unsettling atmosphere. The towering mausoleums, the underground vaults, the labyrinth of pathways, they create a natural stage for echoes illusions, and shadows that trick the senses. Yet even skeptics who dismiss the supernatural cannot deny the weight of centuries pressing down in every corner. The mind may invent ghosts, but it rarely does so with such consistency, such shared detail across so many voices and decades. Some visitors insist that the energy of Highgate is not evenly spread, but concentrated in particular areas. The Egyptian avenue, with its solemn guardians carved into stone, is said to harbor whispers that rise from the walls when the air is still. The Circle of Lebanon, carved deep into the hillside, carries an oppressive silence that makes visitors feel as though they are being swallowed whole. Swain's Lane, of course, is infamous for the shadowy figure that crosses the road, its glowing eyes gleaming through fog. Each of these places seems to act like a doorway, where the boundary between worlds bends just enough for strange things to slip through. There are even accounts from those who believe the spirits of Highgate have reached beyond its gates. A man who lived in a house nearby described waking at night to the sound of heavy breathing in his room. He thought it was an intruder, only to find no one there. Night after night, the sound returned, sometimes accompanied by the faint image of a cloaked figure in the corner. He eventually moved away, convinced that the energy of the cemetery had seeped into his home. Others tell of cold spots in the houses along Swain's Lane, sudden drops in temperature that leave breath visible in the air despite the warmth of the season. To them, Highgate's ghosts are not confined to their graves, but wander the streets and gardens around the cemetery, drifting like mist through the city. Despite all this, Highgate remains a place of fascination, drawing tourists, historians, and those curious about the supernatural. Some walk its paths in daylight, admiring the Gothic beauty of its architecture, feeling only peace and quiet. But when night falls, when the light fades and the cemetery sinks into shadow, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a place where silence is heavy, where each gust of wind feels like a whisper, and where the imagination is stirred into vivid life. For some, those whispers are nothing more than the tricks of a Gothic stage. For others, they are proof that the dead have not fully gone, that they walk beside us still, watching from the shadows of Highgate. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all, that the stories endure not just because people crave fear, but because the atmosphere of Highgate compels belief. You walk among the ivy, the statues, the crumbling tombs, and you feel it. A presence, invisible yet undeniable. Whether it is sorrow, memory, or something more, it clings to the air like a veil. And as countless visitors have learned, once you leave the cemetery, that feeling doesn't always stay behind. It lingers, quiet and patient, like a shadow that knows your name. Greyfriars Kirkyard, nestled in the heart of Edinburgh, wears its history like a cloak of stone and shadow. By day, it is a place where tourists wander among crooked headstones, where the city's life hums just beyond the gates. But by night, when the old lamps burn faintly and the air grows sharp with cold, the kirkyard becomes something altogether different. The whispers of the past stir between the graves, and those who linger too long speak of encounters that chill them to the bone. Greyfriars is not simply a resting place. It has earned a darker reputation, one that has placed it among the most haunted burial grounds in the world. The most notorious part of the cemetery lies behind locked gates, a section known as the Covenanters' Prison. It was here in the 17th century that hundreds of Scottish Presbyterians were imprisoned after their rebellion was crushed. They were forced to endure unspeakable suffering, starvation, exposure to the brutal cold, and endless days of torment. Many died where they lay, their bodies discarded without care. It is said that the earth itself holds their anguish, and that the weight of so much suffering still bleeds into the ground. Walking among these tombs, people have felt sudden nausea, pressure in their chest, or even scratches appearing on their skin. But it is the Black Mausoleum that holds the kirkyard's most infamous legend. Within its stone walls rests Sir George Mackenzie, known to history as Bloody Mackenzie. In life, he was a ruthless prosecutor of the Covenanters, sentencing countless men, women, and children to death. Some were executed, others sent to rot in foreign lands, and many more suffered imprisonment within the kirkyard itself. Mackenzie carried out his duty with a cold efficiency that earned him his fearful title. Even after death, his name became entwined with cruelty, and it is his spirit that many claim still stalks Greyfriars to this day. The tale of the Mackenzie poltergeist is one of the most chilling ghost stories in Scotland. It begins in 1999 when a homeless man seeking shelter forced his way into the Black Mausoleum. He disturbed the tomb, breaking into the crypt beneath. What he found there terrified him so deeply that he fled into the night, never to return. In the days that followed, reports of violent encounters began to multiply. Visitors were scratched, pushed, and even knocked unconscious by an unseen force. Paranormal investigators recorded sudden drops in temperature, strange bangs echoing in the night, and flashes of shadow darting past their eyes. Tour guides who dared to lead groups near the mausoleum told of guests collapsing without warning. Some awoke with bruises, others with unexplained burns or cuts etched into their skin. One woman described feeling as though icy fingers had wrapped tightly around her throat, leaving her gasping for air. Another swore she was shoved so hard against a wall that she could not move for several minutes. Unlike the gentle spirits of other haunted grounds, the Mackenzie poltergeist is known for aggression. It does not linger silently in the background. It strikes, and it has left its mark on hundreds of people who braved its territory. Some skeptics claim the tales are exaggerated, fueled by the eerie reputation of Greyfriars and the theatrics of ghost tours. Yet the sheer number of accounts, from locals and tourists alike, creates a chilling consistency. The Black Mausoleum is locked to the public, but even from outside its gates, people report sudden chills or the feeling of being watched. A heaviness clings to the air around it, a suffocating sense of dread that leaves many hurrying away before their curiosity can tempt them closer. And always the shadow of Mackenzie looms. People say they have seen a figure near the mausoleum, cloaked and solid, only to vanish when approached. Some believe it is the prosecutor himself, condemned to walk among the souls he tormented in life. Others suggest it is something darker, a force born from the suffering of the Covenanters, using Mackenzie's resting place as its anchor. Whatever the truth, Greyfriars is a place where even the bravest hesitate, where the boundary between the living and the dead feels razor thin. Greyfriars is not only home to the legend of Bloody Mackenzie. The ground itself feels charged, as though the grief and cruelty endured within its walls seeped into the soil and never left. Many visitors step through the gates expecting a quiet walk among historic stones, yet leave shaken by the strange weight in the air. Some describe the sensation as being watched, others as if the cemetery itself resents their presence. And then there are those who carry away something far more lasting, unexplainable scratches, carved across their skin, bruises they cannot account for, or nightmares so vivid they wake gasping, convinced the shadow stands at the foot of their bed. The Covenanters' prison, locked away from the casual tourist, is said to be one of the most active places for paranormal encounters in the world. Guides with permission to enter this section tell of sudden gusts of freezing wind that cut through even on still nights. Candles are blown out by invisible hands, and cameras malfunction without warning. Some guests collapse, trembling and pale, whispering that something has touched them. One story tells of a man who entered with skeptical laughter, brushing off the warnings. Halfway through the tour, he fell to the ground screaming, clutching at his chest. When he was carried out, red marks were found across his torso as though clawed by something unseen. He refused to speak of what happened afterward, but those who were there never forgot the look of terror in his eyes. What makes the Mackenzie poltergeist stand apart from other spirits is its violent nature. Unlike the gentle apparitions seen in many cemeteries, this presence seems intent on reminding the living of its power. People have been shoved against stone walls with such force they left with bruises. Others have fainted, awakening to find scratches across their arms or faces. A few have even been knocked unconscious, with no explanation for how they fell. It is not a whispering ghost, nor a shadow that fades away when light shines upon it. It is something that lashes out, unpredictable and relentless, a spirit or perhaps a force that resists being ignored. Paranormal researchers have pored over Greyfriars, eager to document the unusual activity. Thermal cameras have recorded sudden cold spots, drops of temperature so severe they mimic walking into a freezer. Audio recorders have captured growls, faint whispers, and even cries that cannot be traced to any source. One investigator described standing near the Black Mausoleum when his equipment registered a burst of electromagnetic energy so strong it fried the batteries instantly. Moments later, he felt an invisible hand strike him across the face. The welt remained for days. Skeptics argue that faulty equipment, suggestion, and the power of fear explain these experiences. Yet for those who have endured the touch of the unseen, no explanation feels strong enough. But perhaps what unsettles people most about Greyfriars is not just the violent activity, but the sense of despair that lingers in its corners. Tourists often speak of sudden emotions overwhelming them. Sadness so sharp it brings tears, anger rising without cause, or dread so heavy it makes their stomachs churn. They step into the Covenanters' prison and feel surrounded, as though hundreds of eyes glare from the darkness. Some whisper that it is not just Mackenzie who haunts the kirkyard, but the restless souls of the Covenanters themselves. Men and women who suffered and died within those walls, their voices still rising in the night, carried by centuries of grief. The blending of history and legend creates an atmosphere unlike any other. The stories are not stitched from imagination alone. They grow from the very real brutality that took place here. The Covenanters were starved, beaten, and left to die, their suffering woven into the earth. Mackenzie's name still inspires shivers, a symbol of merciless judgment. And now those who step into Greyfriars often feel that both victim and persecutor remain, trapped together in endless conflict, with the living caught between them. The stories of Greyfriars are not confined to the eerie testimonies of tourists or the notes of paranormal investigators. Locals, too, speak with a kind of uneasy respect about the kirkyard. Taxi drivers sometimes refuse to stop near its gates after midnight, claiming they have seen figures wandering inside long after the cemetery is locked. One driver told of a woman in old-fashioned clothing stepping into the road, her face pale and eyes downcast. He braked sharply, heart racing, but when he blinked, she had vanished. Another driver swore he saw several shapes standing silently at the gates on a foggy night, watching him as he passed. He drove faster, unwilling to glance in his mirror. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of Greyfriars is the way the Mackenzie poltergeist seems to follow people home. Many visitors report disturbances beginning after their tours have ended. Objects shift in their houses. Doors open without cause. Some wake to find deep scratches across their arms or legs, just as others had reported inside the cemetery. There are even accounts of visitors who began experiencing sleep paralysis for weeks afterwards, each time sensing the same oppressive weight on their chest that they had felt near the Black Mausoleum, whether imagination carried the fear into their dreams or something truly attached itself to them. These stories remind people that the kirkyard's reach may extend far beyond its locked gates. Tour guides who lead the famous City of the Dead tours into the Covenanters' prison often warn guests before entering. They speak frankly of fainting, of scratches, of panic attacks, of people leaving in tears. Yet despite the warnings, or perhaps because of them, crowds gather night after night. Some seek the thrill, others genuine contact with the beyond, and often they do not leave disappointed. Reports of fainting guests are so common that guides carry first aid kits ready for the collapse that comes without warning. Once a woman fell to the ground screaming, clawing at her throat, insisting she could not breathe. When she was lifted away, faint red marks in the shape of fingers were visible across her neck. Others describe feeling as though something passes directly through them, a blast of icy wind that freezes the lungs and makes the body shake. Some fall to their knees, overwhelmed by nausea. One man said he felt a sharp pain in his back, as though struck by a blade. When he returned home, he found 3 long scratches carved into his skin. The wounds healed quickly, but left behind scars that he carries to this day. Of course, skeptics argue that suggestion explains much of this. They point out that people arrive primed for fear, guided through pitch-black chambers and told tales of terror. They remind us that fainting and hyperventilation can be caused by anxiety, by the power of the mind to make fear into something physical. Yet even the skeptics hesitate when they learn just how many consistent accounts exist. The same sensations, the same scratches, the same choking force that seems to target the neck and chest. These repetitions are difficult to dismiss, and so the legend of the Mackenzie poltergeist continues to grow. Beyond the Black Mausoleum, Greyfriars carries quieter yet equally unsettling presences. The most famous is the Grey Lady, an apparition seen wandering the paths at night. She is said to drift silently among the headstones, vanishing whenever anyone approaches. Some believe she is the ghost of a grieving mother searching for her child's grave. Others think she may be tied to the countless anonymous burials in the Covenanters' prison. Her sorrow spread across the entire kirkyard. Those who see her rarely describe fear, only sadness, a reminder that not every ghost in Greyfriars lashes out in anger. Some linger simply because their grief never found peace. And then there are reports of phantom dogs, fitting for a place so closely tied to the story of Greyfriars Bobby, the loyal terrier who guarded his master's grave for 14 years. Some visitors swear they have felt the brush of a small dog against their legs, only to turn and find nothing there. Others have heard faint barking in the stillness of the night. Whether these stories are born of affection for Bobby or something more mysterious, they add a strangely tender layer to the otherwise violent legends of Greyfriars. But the shadow of Mackenzie overshadows all else. His black mausoleum sits like a scar at the center of the kirkyard. And no matter how many years pass, the tales of violent hauntings refuse to fade. Guides still tell the story of the homeless man who first disturbed the crypt, his terror sparking the modern legend. They remind guests that before him, the mausoleum was quiet, only another dark stone in a cemetery of many. Afterward, something awoke, something that has not rested since. Greyfriars Kirkyard has never tried to hide its darker truths. The stones speak openly if you listen. Names chiseled into granite and sandstone, once sharp, now worn smooth, hold entire lifetimes of suffering, devotion, and final silence. When paired with the raw, violent history of the Black Mausoleum, those stories become fuel for lingering unrest. The very air carries the weight of centuries of fear and memory, as if the past refuses to yield to the present. Some visitors describe sudden bouts of nausea, headaches, or dizziness when standing near the mausoleum. Skeptics point to dampness, mold, or poor air circulation. But others insist the explanation is spiritual rather than physical, that the sensation is the pressing of something beyond human, a hand unseen, gripping the edges of their mind. Even guides who make a living telling these tales admit that the atmosphere can shift dramatically, as though the night itself becomes heavier. They tell of candles that flicker out with no wind, of a sharp crack echoing like a gunshot, and of shadows forming where no light should make them. What makes Greyfriars particularly unnerving is that the activity does not seem bound to one era. Accounts from the 17th century mention uneasy spirits, but reports in the 20th and 21st centuries suggest the haunting continues, adapting to each generation. Modern ghost hunters carry recorders, cameras, and thermal imaging devices, capturing unexplained sounds, strange temperature shifts, and sudden, violent disturbances. In one famous instance, a researcher was lifted off his feet and flung back several steps, leaving bruises that resembled claw marks. Whether you believe in spirits or not, the consistency of reports over centuries paints a chilling picture. The most unsettling aspect of the Black Mausoleum's reputation is the belief that its hauntings might not be contained within its walls. Some visitors claim that after entering the kirkyard, something follows them home. Dreams become restless, filled with shadows at the edge of vision. Objects shift in their houses. A feeling of being observed grows stronger with each passing night, until they return to Greyfriars, offering apologies or prayers in hopes of severing the connection. It suggests that the mausoleum does not simply frighten, it ensnares. Like a spider at the center of its web, it waits for those who stumble too close, and then its influence lingers long after the gates of the graveyard are locked. Yet amidst this darkness, there is a strange reverence that persists. Greyfriars is not abandoned. It is visited daily by people who seek connection, remembrance, or understanding. For some, it is a place of history and respect. For others, it is a stage where the boundary between the living and the dead thins to a fragile veil. And for a rare few, it is a place where confrontation with the unseen becomes impossible to deny. The Black Mausoleum remains a centerpiece of that confrontation, a chamber that refuses to stay silent, a vault where history's cruelty feeds the restless echoes of the present. When you stand at its threshold, whether in daylight with tourists buzzing around or in the stillness of night when the shadows own the ground, you feel a presence woven into the stones. It is not simply the memory of George Mackenzie, nor the bodies of the Covenanters who suffered in his shadow. It is the combined weight of centuries of human struggle, pain, belief, and fear. Some say that the haunting is the energy of injustice, a scar on the city's spirit that refuses to fade. Others believe it is something darker, something feeding on that energy and growing stronger with each retelling, each fearful step, each curious visitor who dares to enter. Whatever the truth, Greyfriars Kirkyard stands as one of the most haunted places in the world, and the Black Mausoleum is its beating heart of terror. The story of Greyfriars Kirkyard does not end with its crumbling stones or the chilling figure of the Black Mausoleum. In many ways, what makes Greyfriars unforgettable is not only its haunted grounds, but the legacy of fear and fascination it has carved into the city of Edinburgh and beyond. Its tales have traveled further than the ancient gates, shaping how people see not only the graveyard, but the very idea of haunted places themselves. Greyfriars has become both a cautionary tale and a magnet, drawing in thousands who want to feel for themselves the presence of what may still linger there. When we speak of legacy, we often think of monuments, art, or traditions passed from one generation to the next. But the legacy of Greyfriars is different. It is a legacy of fear, whispered warnings, and ghost stories told in hushed voices around firesides and kitchen tables. Parents tell their children not to wander the graveyard at night. Tourists clutch their coats tighter as they walk past its walls. Even locals, so used to the weight of history on their cobbled streets, sometimes hesitate to step inside once the sun has gone down. This persistent caution, stretching over centuries, tells us that Greyfriars has left a scar deeper than stone. One part of this legacy lies in the countless tours and investigations that now orbit the kirkyard. Guides lead groups through the narrow lanes, their lanterns swinging as they recount the horrors of Mackenzie's cruelty and the restless spirits said to haunt the tomb. These tours are not simply entertainment. They are part of a tradition of storytelling that has kept the legends alive. Without them, the memory of the haunted mausoleum might have faded. Instead, each retelling, each gasp in the night, gives new life to the old terrors. Ghost hunters, too, have carried the reputation of Greyfriars into books, television shows, and documentaries, making its dark legacy known far outside of Scotland. But perhaps the most terrifying part of Greyfriars' legacy is how it seems to adapt. Stories of hauntings at the kirkyard are not frozen in the past. They continue to grow, each generation adding new layers of fear. Where once people spoke of strange lights or whispers, modern accounts tell of scratches, sudden fainting, and objects moving with no cause. This progression suggests that whatever dwells in Greyfriars is not fading, but instead changing, evolving as though aware of the attention it receives. Some believe the act of visiting and retelling the stories feeds the energy, making the haunting stronger. In this way, Greyfriars may not just hold a legacy of fear, it may be actively building it. There is also the legacy of those who claim to have carried the haunting away with them. Stories circulate of visitors who return home only to find themselves plagued by shadows, nightmares, and unexplained disturbances. They speak of knocking sounds in empty rooms, the sensation of being watched, or even phantom hands brushing their skin. Some of these individuals return to Edinburgh to make offerings or apologies, hoping to release whatever followed them. The fact that people feel compelled to travel back to the graveyard, sometimes from countries far away, shows the grip Greyfriars has on the human imagination. The mausoleum does not simply haunt the living within its gates, it reaches into lives far beyond. Legends of Greyfriars have even shaped local culture and tourism. Edinburgh embraces its haunted reputation, and Greyfriars stands at the center of that dark crown. It attracts those who crave the thrill of ghost stories, but it also unsettles those who wonder if the tales are more than just stories. For the city, this legacy is a double-edged sword. Greyfriars is a source of fascination, but also of dread, a reminder that history's cruelties can echo endlessly through time. The chilling grip of Greyfriars has also seeped into literature, film, and popular culture, becoming a symbol of Edinburgh's haunted soul. Writers pen novels inspired by the tales of Mackenzie's ghost, while filmmakers set scenes of restless spirits among its crooked stones. Some even claim the eerie atmosphere of the kirkyard influenced darker depictions of graveyards in Gothic fiction. It is as if Greyfriars has given storytellers a blueprint for horror itself, an archetype of what a haunted place should be. When an author seeks a setting that feels timelessly dreadful, when a director wants shadows that seem alive, they often echo Greyfriars, whether they realize it or not. Its name may not always appear on the page or screen, but its essence lingers. Beyond art and storytelling, the kirkyard has left marks on belief and superstition. The sheer consistency of its ghostly reputation has forced even skeptics to pause. Locals might laugh off haunted castles or phantom carriages, but when it comes to Greyfriars, Their tone often changes. There's a weight to the stories here, an unshakable seriousness that makes people tread more carefully. For some, it reinforces a belief in spirits, convincing them that life does not end with the body. For others, it fuels fears of curses, of energies that cannot be explained but are undeniably felt. This has created a culture where even the most doubtful tend to show respect within those walls, as if instinctively aware that this ground demands it. Religious figures have weighed in as well. Some ministers have spoken of Greyfriars as a place stained by cruelty, where human suffering left a permanent spiritual scar. They suggest that prayers, blessings, or acts of atonement might ease the unrest, though many believe the darkness there is too deeply embedded to be so easily lifted. Others warn that tampering with such energies through rituals, seances, or even casual provocation could invite disaster. This has fueled further intrigue, turning Greyfriars into not just a haunted site, but a contested spiritual battleground where faith, fear, and folklore collide. The economic legacy of Greyfriars cannot be ignored either. Haunted tours, paranormal investigations, and books about the Kirkyard have become a thriving industry. For some, this is a sign that the legends are exploited, that the pain of the past has been turned into entertainment. For others, it is simply proof that Greyfriars has earned its place as one of the most famous graveyards in the world. Yet this industry has another effect. It ensures that Greyfriars is never forgotten. As long as people continue to visit, to tell stories, to write and film and investigate, the legacy of Greyfriars will only grow stronger. And then there are the personal accounts, diaries, letters, and testimonies spanning centuries. From Victorian travelers describing sudden chills to modern tourists recounting scratches and bruises, these stories create a chain across time. They reveal that Greyfriars is not tied to one generation, but to all who enter its gates. Each experience adds to a collective memory that feels alive, as though the graveyard itself is keeping score. This may be the most terrifying legacy of all. The sense that Greyfriars is not just a passive backdrop for haunting, but an active participant in its own legend. If you imagine the graveyard as a stage, the spirits as actors, and the visitors as the audience, then what makes Greyfriars unique is how that play never ends. Night after night, year after year, the performance continues, with new players drawn in by curiosity or courage. Some leave unscathed, others change forever, but all become part of the narrative. And like any great performance, the story grows richer with each retelling, cementing its place in the world's imagination. The legacy of Greyfriars is also etched into the landscape of Edinburgh itself. The Kirkyard sits not as a forgotten ruin on the outskirts of town, but in the very heart of the city, pressed up against schools, homes, and bustling streets. Every day, life flows around it, yet the graveyard remains an island of silence and dread. This strange coexistence makes its legacy more powerful. Children walk past the gates on their way to class, perhaps unaware of the stories of bruised tourists and spectral attacks that swirl just beyond the iron bars. Cafes serve steaming cups of tea nearby, while the dead in Greyfriars are said to stir only a few steps away. This blending of the ordinary with the extraordinary ensures that the Kirkyard is never entirely removed from daily thought. It is always there, looming at the edges of modern life, reminding the living that history is never truly gone. Many historians and folklorists argue that Greyfriars' terrifying reputation has helped preserve Edinburgh's culture of storytelling. In a city where myths, legends, and ballads already thrive, the tales of Greyfriars stand out as a constant source of wonder and warning. Guides, writers, and performers carry on the tradition not only for entertainment, but also as a way of connecting to their city's darker past. The stories of Greyfriars are not just ghost tales. They are reminders of human cruelty, injustice, and the resilience of those who suffered. Each time someone tells the story of Mackenzie or the Restless Spirits, they breathe life into history, ensuring it is not erased or softened by the passing of time. In this sense, the terrifying legacy of Greyfriars is also an educational one, a grim but necessary teacher of the past. Another element of Greyfriars' legacy lies in the psychology of fear itself. Psychologists who study paranormal experiences often cite Greyfriars as a prime example of how atmosphere shapes perception. The looming vaults, the weathered stones, the stories whispered before entering. All of these prime the mind to expect something unnatural. And when expectation collides with suggestion, even the smallest sound or shadow can spark terror. Yet the intriguing thing about Greyfriars is how often the phenomena go beyond suggestion. Bruises, burns, fainting spells, these cannot be dismissed as imagination alone. The site challenges even scientific thinkers, forcing them to wrestle with experiences that defy easy answers. This has made Greyfriars not only a cornerstone of ghost lore, but also a subject of serious academic interest. The Kirkyard's legacy has also inspired acts of devotion and defiance. Some people leave tokens on the graves, flowers, notes, even coins, as offerings to the dead, either to appease them or to show respect. Others enter defiantly, daring the spirits to reveal themselves. Both actions are part of the ongoing dialogue between the living and the unseen that defines Greyfriars. The graveyard is not simply a relic of history. It is an active place where people continue to seek connection, whether through reverence or challenge. In this way, the legacy of Greyfriars is not static. It is alive, continually shaped by those who interact with it. Legends tell of visitors who come not for thrill or curiosity, but for answers. Some arrive burdened by grief, hoping the proximity to restless spirits might help them reach their own lost loved ones. Others are drawn by fascination with the Covenanters, standing at the graves of those who suffered for their faith, feeling as if the air itself hums with their devotion and pain. These visitors often describe Greyfriars as a mirror, reflecting back whatever emotion they bring. To the frightened, it is terrifying. To the grieving, it is sorrowful. To the curious, it is a puzzle. Its legacy, then, is as diverse as the people who walk its paths, which may explain why it has endured so powerfully through the centuries. Perhaps the most chilling part of Greyfriars' legacy is the idea that it will never fade. Stone may crumble, and names may erode, but the energy of what happened there, violence, injustice, devotion, and fear, seems too deeply ingrained to vanish. The graveyard feels eternal, its stories destined to be told as long as humans are drawn to the mystery of death. Even if the mausoleum were sealed forever, even if tours ceased and guides fell silent, the ground itself would likely continue to hum with its old power. The terrifying legacy of Greyfriars is that it has outlasted generations, and it will almost certainly outlast many more. What keeps Greyfriars so deeply etched into collective memory is the way its reputation weaves together history, folklore, and lived experience. For some, it is the brutality of Mackenzie's persecution of the Covenanters that lingers like an open wound. For others, it is the personal encounters, scratches, bruises, sudden fainting, that leave undeniable marks on their bodies and minds. Together, these two threads, history and haunting, form a legacy unlike any other. It is not just about the past, nor just about the supernatural. It is about the unsettling way the two overlap, reminding us that cruelty leaves traces deeper than flesh, and that sometimes The echoes of injustice do not die quietly. One of the most telling aspects of this legacy is how it creates a shared sense of unease. Even those who do not believe in ghosts often describe Greyfriars with caution. Skeptics who dismiss haunted castles or phantom lights in other places still tend to lower their voices when speaking of the Black Mausoleum. This shared caution becomes part of the legacy itself, binding people together in acknowledgement. There's something about Greyfriars resists explanation. The graveyard becomes a cultural touchstone, a place where belief and disbelief stand side by side, united by respect for what feels undeniably powerful. There are those who believe the terrifying legacy of Greyfriars is not just a reminder of the past, but a warning for the future. The Covenanters' prison and Mackenzie's cruelty highlight how unchecked power can lead to suffering that scars generations. The idea that this suffering has left the ground itself restless serves as a cautionary tale. What we do in life may leave marks that cannot be erased, no matter how many years pass. In this way, Greyfriars is more than a haunted site. It is a moral lesson, carved into the very soil of Edinburgh. Its ghosts are not simply there to frighten, but to remind the living of what cruelty and injustice can unleash. At the same time, Greyfriars has become a place of resilience. Despite its horrors, people still enter, still tell stories, still face whatever waits in the shadows. The persistence of visitors, investigators, and guides shows that humans are not content to shy away from fear. Instead, we move toward it, seeking understanding, connection, or even a strange kind of companionship with the past. This, too, is part of the legacy. The courage of the living to walk side by side with the dead, to explore the unknown even when it terrifies. Some say Greyfriars has become a vortex, a place where emotions and energies collect, amplifying with each new story told. The more people speak of its hauntings, the more alive they seem to become, creating a cycle that keeps the legacy strong. If that is true, then Greyfriars will never truly fade. Its terrifying reputation will only continue to grow, drawing more people to its gates, feeding the restless energy within, and ensuring that its name is never forgotten. In the end, the legacy of Greyfriars is not something you can see or touch. It is something you feel. It lives in the chill down your spine when you hear the name of the Black Mausoleum, in the quickening of your heartbeat when you imagine walking its shadowed paths at night, in the hushed tone people use when telling its stories. It is a legacy carried in whispers and silences, in glances over shoulders, in the lingering thought that some places never truly rest. So when you think of Greyfriars, do not think only of stone walls or worn graves. Think of the centuries of fear, fascination, and reverence that have kept its legend alive. Think of the countless people who have stepped inside its gates and come away changed. Think of how a single graveyard, bound by history and shadow, has become one of the most haunted places in the world, its terrifying legacy carried from one generation to the next. And most of all, remember that this legacy does not stay behind the iron gates. It follows in stories, in dreams, in the imagination of anyone who dares to wonder what truly stirs in the darkness of Greyfriars. Paris is a city that breathes romance, art, and revolution, but tucked away in its eastern quarter lies a place that carries a different weight altogether. Père Lachaise Cemetery is not only the largest resting ground in the city, but one of the most visited cemeteries in the world. To wander through its paths is to step into a silent conversation with history. The air carries a mix of elegance and sorrow, and every moss-covered tomb seems to hum with untold stories. Unlike Greyfriars or Highgate, where decay and dread dominate, Père Lachaise holds a quieter sort of haunting, one built not only on loss, but also on the echo of greatness. Here, whispers belong not just to forgotten souls, but to some of the most famous names in history, whose lives continue to stir fascination long after their deaths. The cemetery was established in the early 19th century and named after Father Francois de Lachaise, confessor to King Louis XIV. At first, it struggled to attract burials seen as too far from the city center. But when the remains of well-known figures were ceremoniously reburied here, including the poet Jean de La Fontaine and playwright Molière, Père Lachaise transformed into the fashionable place to rest. Soon, Parisian families vied for plots, and monuments began to rise like stone sculptures of memory, each more elaborate than the last. Today, over 1 million souls are buried here, and the cemetery feels like a city within a city, where streets of marble crypts replace boulevards, and angels of stone stand watch in place of policemen. What sets Père Lachaise apart is the way the living continue to walk among the dead. Tourists from across the globe wind through its narrow paths, maps in hand, seeking the graves of Oscar Wilde, Jim Morrison, Edith Piaf, and countless others. Fans leave lipstick kisses on Wilde's grave, offerings of letters or flowers for Piaf, and candles that flicker before Morrison's tomb. These tributes feel more like acts of devotion than mourning, proof that the legacy of art and music can linger long after the body is gone. Yet beneath this devotion is a current of unease. Many visitors claim the cemetery hums with energy as though the countless voices of its residents have never truly gone silent. The ghosts of Père Lachaise are not said to be violent like those of Greyfriars or sorrowful like those of Highgate. Instead, they are watchful, curious, sometimes even playful. There are stories of footsteps crunching along the gravel behind wanderers only for them to turn and find the paths empty. Photographs often capture strange shapes or faces peering from mausoleum windows. Tour guides whisper of shadowy figures drifting among the monuments at dusk, blending so seamlessly into the environment that only when they vanish do onlookers realize they were never flesh and blood. The cemetery seems to cradle its dead in a kind of restless slumber, one where the departed are never far away, content to watch as generations come to honor or remember them. Yet there is also a darker side. Some who linger too long among the tombs report feeling drained, as if the weight of so many souls presses upon their chest. There are tales of voices whispering just out of reach, too faint to decipher but impossible to ignore. A few have described dreams after visiting Père Lachaise, dreams of standing at ornate tombs, only to see them crack open and release hands of ash that try to pull them inside. Whether these are products of imagination or something deeper, they add to the allure of the cemetery as more than a tourist attraction. It is a place where boundaries blur, where history's great names rest alongside ordinary lives, and where the living may find themselves brushing shoulders with the unseen. As you follow the winding pathways deeper into Père Lachaise, the air begins to feel different. The chatter of tourists fades into a hush, and the crunch of gravel beneath your feet is softened, as though the ground itself is absorbing every sound. The trees rise like sentinels, their branches forming shadowy arches overhead. Some say that walking here at dusk feels less like entering a cemetery and more like stepping into another world, one where time drifts slowly, where the living and the dead seem to exist side by side. And in this place there are whispers. People claim that if you linger long enough by the oldest tombs, you can hear faint murmurs carried on the wind. Skeptics argue it's the rustling leaves or the distant murmur of the city, but believers insist that these are the voices of souls who never truly left. Perhaps it's no surprise that spirits would linger here, for Père Lachaise is more than just a resting place. It's a stage for history, More than 1 million souls are said to be buried within its walls, among them poets, painters, musicians, and philosophers whose names shaped the world. Their lives brought beauty, passion, and sometimes chaos to the earth. And in death, their legacies still draw millions of visitors every year. But what if their spirits, unwilling to let go, still walk among their admirers? One of the most famous stops in the cemetery is the grave of Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors. His grave, simple yet endlessly adorned with flowers and messages from fans, has become a place of pilgrimage. But alongside the tributes are stories, strange stories that make the site more than just a memorial. Visitors claim they felt an inexplicable presence near the grave, like a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a tingling sensation at the back of the neck. Some describe hearing faint strains of music, Morrison's voice echoing in the stillness just out of reach. Security guards, too, have whispered of seeing shadowy figures lingering around his tomb at night, disappearing the moment they draw closer. And Morrison is not the only one. The graves of Frédéric Chopin and Edith Piaf also hold a haunting pull. Chopin's admirers leave flowers, but there are tales of faint piano notes drifting through the air in the dead of night. The music is never complete, only fragments, delicate chords that vanish before they can form a melody. With Piaf, some claim to have heard faint singing, as though a ghostly voice still rises from her grave, carrying the sorrowful tones of her songs across the stillness of the cemetery. Whether real or imagined, these experiences are powerful, leaving many visitors shaken yet oddly comforted, as though art itself cannot be silenced, even by death. But Père Lachaise is not only home to artists. Its silent avenues hold revolutionaries, philosophers, and visionaries. The grave of Oscar Wilde stands out, marked by a striking monument. His admirers once covered the stone with lipstick kisses, a tradition so strong that authorities eventually had to place a protective barrier around it. Yet even this has not stopped tales of Wilde's spirit. Some say he appears to those who linger too long, a fleeting figure dressed in Victorian clothing, standing at the edge of sight. Others have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of wit and charm, a lightness that fills the air, as if Wilde himself has decided to share one last joke with the living. And then there are darker whispers. Some tombs are said to carry a curse. Those who disrespect certain graves, whether by vandalism or even by careless words, have reported strings of misfortune following their visit. Stories circulate of cameras that refuse to work near particular mausoleums, batteries that drain instantly, and photographs that develop with strange shapes in the background. Guides warn visitors to treat every monument with respect, not just out of reverence for the dead, but perhaps also out of caution for forces they cannot fully understand. The paths between the graves stretch like a labyrinth. Some visitors recall getting lost even with a map in hand. They describe walking in circles, ending up at the same tombs again and again, as though the cemetery itself is guiding or perhaps trapping them. One tourist shared a chilling story of walking alone at twilight, only to hear footsteps behind them. When they turned, no one was there, yet the footsteps continued, steady and close, until they hurried toward the gates, too afraid to look back again. And in the stillness of Père Lachaise, such stories are never far from mine. Every statue and every weathered inscription seems to watch. Some angels carved in stone appear mournful, others stern, almost as though they are guardians keeping secrets from those who wander too close. As dusk deepens, the cemetery becomes a place of contrasts. During the day, its beauty can almost make you forget its purpose. Sunlight filters through leaves, casting golden patterns over ornate tombstones, and the quiet hum of visitors creates an atmosphere of reverence. But at night, the scene transforms. The trees cast long skeletal shadows across the pathways, and the air grows heavy with silence. Many say that this is the hour when the cemetery reveals its true character, when the restless souls stir and the famous dead remind the living of their presence. One of the eeriest sights in Père Lachaise is the grave of Allan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism. His monument, shaped like a dolmen, attracts followers from around the world. Devotees leave messages, offerings and flowers, believing that his teachings continue to guide them even beyond the veil of death. But visitors also whisper of strange experiences here. Some claim to feel a magnetic pull near his tomb, an invisible force that draws them closer or makes it difficult to step away. Others describe sudden chills as though Kardec's spirit acknowledges their presence. And for those attuned to the supernatural, the grave has become a place of communication, a doorway between this world and the next. Close by lies the resting place of Abelard and Eloise, medieval lovers whose story of passion and tragedy has echoed through centuries. Their remains lie together beneath a Gothic-style canopy, drawing countless couples who visit to pay tribute to their devotion. Yet some visitors insist the lover's story is not confined to history. Late at night, whispers have been heard around their tomb, faint voices carried on the air that seem to murmur in hushed, intimate tones. A few even report catching the sound of quiet weeping, a grief that lingers across centuries, as though their spirits are still bound to the sorrow of their earthly fate. Among the cemetery's more chilling tales is that of the Communards' Wall. Here in 1871, 147 members of the Paris Commune were executed, their bodies falling where the wall still stands today. It remains a powerful memorial, and yet many who visit describe an unease that clings to the air. The ground feels different, heavier, as though it remembers the violence imprinted upon it. At times, the sound of marching boots has been reported in the stillness, or phantom gunshots that echo faintly before dissolving into silence. Guides speak of visitors leaving pale and shaken, unable to explain the sense of sorrow that weighed on them during their time near the wall. And still, Père Lachaise is not only about sorrow, it is also about fascination. The cemetery itself is a museum of architecture and artistry. Mausoleums rise like miniature cathedrals, some adorned with stained glass windows, others guarded by iron gates, twisted into intricate patterns. Yet even in their beauty, they exude an eerie quality. Many of these tombs resemble houses complete with doors and windows, as if the dead live within. Passers-by sometimes glance into the dim interiors, only to swear they saw a shadow flicker across the glass, or movement where there should be none. Indeed, another curious tale involves the grave of Victor Noir, a journalist shot in the 19th century. His tomb features a bronze statue of Noir lying as though fallen, with remarkable detail. Over the years, a peculiar legend grew around the grave. Women believed that touching certain parts of the statue would bring fertility and love. The tradition became so widespread that the bronze has been polished smooth from countless touches. Yet alongside this strange ritual are whispers of odd occurrences, people claiming to have felt warmth radiating from the statue, or even the sensation that the bronze figure briefly shifted under their hand. It's these strange overlaps between history and myth, reverence and superstition, that give Père Lachaise its magnetic pull. For every famous name etched into stone, there is a legend lingering in the air. For every grand tomb, there is a whispered story of footsteps, voices, or visions that defy explanation. Visitors who wander too long sometimes report losing all sense of time. They enter at midday and swear only an hour has passed, only to find that hours have slipped away unnoticed. Some believe the spirits of the cemetery have a way of bending time, drawing the living deeper into their world until reality feels blurred. The further one ventures from the main paths, the stronger this feeling becomes, with silence pressing in like a heavy cloak. And perhaps most unsettling are the stories of those who never wanted to leave. A handful of accounts tell of visitors hearing their own names whispered softly as they walk. Others describe the sensation of being followed by something unseen, not hostile, but insistent, as though the dead are trying to keep them among the tombs, unwilling to let them return to the world outside the cemetery's gates. The deeper one walks into Père Lachaise, the more the world outside seems to fade. The sounds of the city grow distant, as if muffled by invisible hands. The walls and gates surrounding the cemetery create a pocket of silence, a place suspended between the present and the past. It is within this silence that the strangest encounters are often reported. There are stories of a man dressed in black, seen wandering near the older sections of the cemetery. Witnesses describe him as tall and gaunt, his features obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Some say he lingers near the graves of forgotten poets, others that he vanishes behind mausoleums as soon as he is approached. Guides who know the cemetery well speak of him with caution, hinting that he is not a mere wanderer, but perhaps a shade bound to the cemetery itself, a custodian of secrets who appears when night grows heaviest. Equally unsettling are the reports of strange music drifting through the air. Visitors claim to hear faint strains of piano or violin in the distance, though no source can be found. Some believe it is the lingering spirit of Frédéric Chopin, whose grave lies within Père Lachaise, surrounded by flowers and tributes from admirers around the world. Others suggest it is Edith Piaf, her timeless voice carried on the breeze as though she still sings for Paris even in death. The music fades as quickly as it appears, leaving only silence, but for those who have heard it, the memory is unforgettable. One of the most unnerving tales comes from those who linger too long near the crematorium. The columbarium where urns are housed is a place of reverence, but it has also become a center of ghostly accounts. Visitors report cold spots that cannot be explained by drafts, or the sensation of a hand brushing their shoulder when no one stands nearby. A few describe seeing pale figures standing motionless in the corners, their eyes fixed on the living before dissolving into nothingness. For some, the air here feels charged, as if the sorrow of countless cremations has left an imprint that cannot fade. Yet Père Lachaise is not without its moments of tenderness among the haunting. Some visitors have spoken of feeling guided rather than frightened, as though the spirits of the cemetery wish only to share their stories. A traveler lost in the winding paths once claimed, and that a gentle voice whispered directions in their ear, leading them out safely. Another recounted how, after leaving flowers at the grave of Oscar Wilde, they felt a sudden warmth wash over them, a comfort that lingered even after they had left. These stories suggest that not every presence within the cemetery is restless. Some may be protective, watching over those who honor the past. And still, there is no denying the weight that presses on visitors after dark. A walk through Père Lachaise at night is not simply a stroll among graves. It is a descent into the unseen. The paths twist endlessly, the shadows deepen, and the ornate tombs rise like silent watchers. Many who have dared to remain after closing time confess to feeling the eyes of the dead upon them, following their every step. A number of intruders who attempted to spend the night were found shaken and pale the next morning, their accounts filled with fragments of nightmares that felt too real. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Père Lachaise is its ability to blur the line between memory and haunting. The famous dead are remembered here with flowers, photographs, and monuments, yet their presence often feels more than symbolic. When whispers drift through the trees, when footsteps echo down an empty path, when the chill of unseen hands brushes your skin, the cemetery seems alive in a way no resting place should be. It is as though the spirits demand acknowledgement, unwilling to fade into silence. To walk through Père Lachaise is to walk through centuries of grief, passion, art, and history. It is a place where beauty and unease coexist, where shadows cling to every stone and whispers travel with the wind. Whether one believes the spirits are truly there or merely imagination shaped by the setting, the effect is undeniable. Few leave without feeling something lingering in their thoughts, something they carry long after stepping back into the bustling streets of Paris. So, as the gates close and night takes hold, Père Lachaise becomes more than a cemetery. It becomes a stage where echoes of the past play out endlessly, where the living and the dead share fleeting moments in the stillness. For some, it is inspiring. For others, it is unsettling. But for all who enter, it is unforgettable. The whispers among the famous dead ensure that Père Lachaise will never truly rest in silence.